Hello and welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Veera Raghav. As the India-Canada standoff unravels, where does this put the United States? A special panel lined up ahead to answer that question as External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar gets set to meet US Secretary of State Antony Blinken in a few hours from now. He's already met with National Security Advisor of the United States, Jake Sullivan. Also on the show, a special focus on is India ready for its changing age demographic? But first, on the one side for Washington, it has one of its closest allies and neighbor, Canada. And on the other, arguably its most important strategic partner in Asia and the Indo-Pacific. While External Affairs Minister Jaishankar's meeting with the US Secretary of State was scheduled much before the India-Canada standoff erupted, the focus is on if there will be any indication for the road ahead from this meeting. Both sides, though, haven't indicated any specific points on the agenda.
I don't want to preview the conversations he will have in that meeting, but as we've made clear, we've raised this. We have engaged with our Indian counterparts on this and encouraged them to cooperate with the Canadian investigation, and we continue to encourage them to cooperate.
Right. Before we deep dive into the US question, let's for a moment focus on the domestic realities and sentiments in Canada. Canadian Member of Parliament Kevin Wong joins us now from Vancouver. He's served with the Canadian Naval Forces as well earlier. Sir, thank you for speaking with us. My first question to you, and this is something that's been repeatedly asked by India. Shouldn't your Prime Minister be sharing credible evidence rather than claiming to have them and accuse India? Indian officials and even the External Affairs Minister himself have been seeking this evidence. Is it the domestic political calculus that's driving these allegations?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret that here in Canada, I think we've had issues of concern as it relates to foreign interference, whether it's from the Chinese Communist Party or Russians or otherwise. I think any allegations should be taken seriously, but if there's any evidence at all, it needs to be brought to the appropriate authorities. You know, Canada is still a country of rule of law, of due process, and no charges have been laid. I think it's important that we actually let the appropriate authorities lay any charges if there is evidence to substantiate that and move from there. These really kind of the airing of currently just allegations is super concerning because I think it really hurts what Canada and frankly what India as democratic countries stand for, which should be countries that are governed by the rule of law.
Important that you make that point, sir. India has conducted seventh in a series of raids against alleged Khalistani terrorists. It has emphasized its seriousness in the investigations and cracking down on these groups. Do you think Canada is not taking the threats from India, from these groups seriously?
So I think if there are So I think first and foremost, there's one thing that I'll say. In Canada, everyone is protected by the Canadian Charter of Human Rights. We have a freedom of association, freedom of speech, and so on. But there are actual limits to that. You can't use freedom of speech to advocate for hate or for violence. And I think what's very challenging about the Khalistani movement and a few others is that it crosses into advocating for violence. I can tell you earlier this year, I saw a poster being circulated by people who were sympathetic to the Khalistani movement that specifically called out the targeting India's High Commissioner, who I've gotten to know very well as two of India's consul generals, one in Toronto, who I also have had the privilege of hosting in our community back in Toronto, as well as the Vancouver consul general. That is not protected by freedom of speech. You can't advocate for hate or violence. And I think some of what we're seeing, particularly from the leader of the NDP, Canada's fourth party, a member of the opposition, to kind of fashion himself to be, judge, jury, and executioner, to come out and say that there's allegedly, quote, clear evidence, end quote, is really concerning. Canada must be a country of rule of law. If Jagmeet Singh has alleged clear evidence, he has a duty to bring it forward to the authorities. Why hasn't he done that?
Having said that, sir, where do you see this India-Canada standoff headed? I mean, in terms of India-Canada relationship itself?
I mean, it's obvious that I think we're in a challenging period right now. I'm hopeful that we can repair it because India, I think, and Canada share a lot. We're both democratic countries. We both share rule of law. We have strong people ties. I can tell you my hometown, I grew up in the city of Brampton, and that's where I've gotten to know the Indian diaspora very well myself growing up. And there is so much that both Canada and India share and can learn from one another. And I hope that this is just will end up being kind of a moment of history where we can learn from and move forward, because there are much more bigger issues that we need to be able to work together on.
As we hope for this to blow over, sir, would you say that there may have been many mistakes or an error of judgment on the part of the Prime Minister Trudeau there, including the embarrassment of inviting a former Nazi soldier to Parliament?
As it relates particularly to the Prime Minister's remarks in the House of Commons on allegedly what he saw in terms of the allegations of India being involved in Mr. Nijjar's death, I think I have to ask, where is the evidence? If there are real credible evidence, or in his words, credible allegations, why haven't charges been laid? And why also the difference in approach as it relates to Mr. Nijjar, who is an outspoken member of the Canadian Sikh community, and all of the overwhelming amount of concerns and allegations have been raised as it relates to the Chinese Communist Party. Why the two different approaches when it comes to these diaspora here in Canada? It was the Prime Minister himself who said a Canadian is a Canadian is a Canadian. So why is he concerned about allegedly foreign interference in one community but not in another? I think it's no secret that, particularly in British Columbia, whether it's for for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP or the Liberals, that the Sikh community plays an outsized role in the elections of at least 12 seats in British Columbia, right? And so you have to wonder, is there a political calculation there where you're putting politics or party before one's country? Because I sure hope that's not the case.
Where is the evidence is what you ask. It's the same question that Indian officials are asking as well.
Yes, full stop. And frankly, take it out of political hands and leave it up to the proper authorities, Canada's Federal National Police, the RCMP. If there is evidence, hopefully they're not only just working on the investigation, but that charges will be laid. That this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier as it relates to foreign interference from the Chinese Communist Party. I think Canada must be a country of rule of law. There must be due process, and there must be a responsibility for anyone that might have any evidence, including Jagmeet Singh. It's not up to him to decide whether it's credible or not. He has a duty to bring it forward to the authorities so that they can conduct their investigation and lay charges if warranted. And like I was saying earlier, I think Canada and India have a deep and long relationship, and I'm hopeful that we can get back to building on it and working together to advance many of the different values, democratic, climate action, and so on, for the benefit of both our countries.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Wong, for those thoughts there. We'll keep a close track of it, perhaps come back to you as this relationship and these equations evolve during this process. But where does this leave Washington? Joining us this evening, Dr. Walter C. Ladwig III from the Department of War Studies, King's College London, former Indian Foreign Secretary Kanwal Sibal, former Indian diplomat Ashok Sajjanahar, Toby Simon, founder, president of the Strategic Affairs think tank in Bengaluru, Synergia Foundation, and also with us, NDTV's Namrata Brar. My first question to you, Mr. Sibal, is this. What would India expect out of Washington? I'm not speaking on the record or in public, but in terms of approach to this entire problem, what would be India's expectations?
Well, I think it's a difficult situation for the United States because the United States has taken a partisan position in its public statements, whether at the level of the National Security Advisor or the Secretary of State himself, asking India to cooperate with Canada the implication of this is that India has something to answer for. Otherwise, why should the United States ask India to cooperate with Canada? Canada has not given any specific or relevant information, as our foreign minister has very clearly said on US soil before his meeting with Blinken. So if Canada has not shared information, is not in a position to do so, and is relying on some intelligence information, SIGINT or HUMINT, and that is not enough to present India with anything specific, then I can't see why the United States is asking us to cooperate with Canada. Cooperate with what? To self-incriminate ourselves, to find out where we might be guilty, potentially, because these are potential links. So we must discover the potential links for the Canadians and for the Americans. This is a ridiculous position to take. And the other thing which is, I think, wrong on America's part is that one can understand they have very close ties with Canada. It's an ally. They have been through thick and thin over the decades. Canada has willingly supported America in all its foreign military actions, has contributed militarily to that. So, and then, of course, it's a next door neighbor. Their economies are intermeshed. So it's a very vital relationship. I accept that.
Right.
But why hasn't he at the same time, knowing the past, knowing all the representations over the years to the Canadians to suppress and curb these elements, why haven't they, while asking India to cooperate with Canada, also said that Canada should cooperate with India in terms of meeting its concerns?
Right.
Then it's a more balanced statement. Then the two can get together and discuss each other's concerns. So therefore, I don't expect much to come out of this meeting. We have our position. It has been clearly stated. The United States has stated its position, and it is incumbent on the United States not to encourage Canada to go down the path that it is going.
That's an important point that you make there. Dr. Walter Ladwig, given that there has been enormous amount of evidence that's been put out by Indian intelligence apparatus, and the External Affairs Minister himself has said that India has shared evidence regarding alleged Khalistani elements in Canada and has made even extradition requests. How do you see the rest of the Five Eyes, the US and specifically the UK as well, in this context? I mean, do you see them actually trying to negate this relationship issue between India and Canada? Do you see them taking a stand, or do you see the old arrangements continuing to dominate this?
I think every one of the Five Eyes countries would prefer to avoid having to take a side in this situation. The United States, Australia principally, but the UK as well, have spent a lot of time and effort over the past decades building a strategic partnership with India, and that's very important. At the same time, there are allegations that information was provided to Canada from Five Eyes partners. I think many people suspect it was principally the United States. And that may inform, to an extent, the American position on this. If they have seen something or recorded something that they think is compelling enough, that might explain what Ambassador Sybil was talking about in terms of this request to cooperate. But neither the US, nor Canada, nor Australia, nor New Zealand want to have to choose one or the other.
Right. You're saying they don't want to choose one over the other. But one of the points that's been raised, and before I go across to Ambassador Ashok Sajjanahar as well, one of the points that's been raised is, Dr. Walter, is that, you know, the links between these terror groups, when you're talking of political convenience determining the response to terror, does that statement cut ice?
No, I don't think so. And again, I am not privy to the dossiers that the NIA has delivered to the Canadian government, so I can't speak to those. But there's no tolerance for terrorism in the United States, and there's not a distinction, I think, between terrorism that affects India and terrorism that would affect the US. Those days have passed. The United States is quite concerned on a variety of spectrums of terrorist groups that principally target India. So I don't know what asks have been made, if the Indian government has asked American help in interfacing with the Canadians to bring pressure on them to be more responsive. And again, the information that's been presented to Canada, I don't know, but I don't think we would think political convenience would lead one to decide which terrorists are important and which ones aren't.
Mr. Ashok Sajjanahar, what would you say to that?
Well, I think we have made our position very clear that from the 19th of September, when the charges were first made in the Canadian Parliament, and we have said, and it's not only India that has been saying this, it has been the whole world that has been saying that, the investigation has not been completed. There is no charge sheet, but of the Liberal Party, who's from the same party as Mr. Trudeau, he has said that the information shared with him by Mr. Trudeau is information that is available in the public domain. It is not available, there's no secret or confidential information that the Prime Minister has shared with him. So obviously there is no information available with them. So on the basis of all this, for the US Secretary of State, that we, suggesting that India cooperate, it appears more that, rather than cooperation, what the US Secretary of State is saying is that since we are saying it, you come up with a confession. And, that is quite ridiculous, because everyone wants investigation, everyone wants evidence, both in Canada as well as all over the world.
That's a point that's been made emphatically. Where does that leave us, though, in terms of our relationship with not just Canada, but whether it is the US, whether it is the UK, or whether it is Australia? Mr. Sibal.
Oh, I don't think it's going to affect materially our relationship with the UK, Australia, or the US. The US has to do fine balancing. They have invested a lot in this relationship. You've seen how even at the G20 meeting, the kind of joint statement that has been issued between the two sides, as if it was a bilateral visit that President Biden had made. And then, of course, the Indo-Pacific military army chiefs have just met in New Delhi. So that kind of business will carry on. The relationship is vital for both sides. If there's a hiccup, America is not playing its cards well. I think they don't want to give the impression to Canada that they are not supporting them, especially as statements have been made here and there that the United States is distancing itself from Canada's charges. And this has piqued them and therefore compelled them at the National Security Council spokesperson saying, no, this information is absolutely wrong. And this was again reiterated by the National Security Advisor. But I think they're sensitive to this part. But whether America will be so irresponsible geopolitically to sacrifice relationship with India or cause a serious setback in relationship with India over this affair, to my mind, is unimaginable. Already, there are huge problems the United States has with Russia and with China, and if they have also with India, then everything that America is afraid of in terms of the changing balances in the world will actually come to pass progressively. This multipolarity and expansion of BRICS and everything else, and the entire leadership of India of the global South. United States has many, many vital stakes in the India relationship, as have we. So it's not a one-sided relationship. Right. But I think America should call upon Canada. Look, since 1985, when the Air India plane was downed, Canada has not cooperated with us on curbing Khalistani terrorism or Sikh terrorism of Canadian citizens. This is a fact. So why doesn't the United States focus on this and say publicly that we need Canada also to enter into a serious dialogue with India to control and curb these elements? And they have, of course, to begin at home. Our San Francisco consulate has been set on fire twice. And there are, you mentioned Gurpatwant Singh, he's a US citizen. So they have to do their bit too. They have to do their bit in this regard.
In a changing world order, Dr. Walter, is that sentiment, even being appreciated? Or do you believe that it's not? I mean, the fact is that any investigation, the credibility of it depends on the unbiased nature of it. Given that the whole perception, at least in India is that it's been an unfair allegation that's been made at India. How do we trust any outcome of an investigation or evidence that's being shared?
Well, I think it comes down to the quality of the evidence and the preponderance of which either points, in support of the allegation or not. Now, with respect to why this surfaced when it did, my understanding is that this story was about to break in Canadian media, and therefore Prime Minister Trudeau was almost pressured into making some sort of announcement before, the intrepid journalists of Canada did. But at the end of the day, we are all nations of laws with legal systems that should transparently evaluate the evidence presented. And again, I agree with the rest of my panelists that it's beyond time for Canada to be able to share this information that they have and let us take a look and see what exactly is it that is behind this. Now, there may be a complication going back to this question of involvement in the Five Eyes, particularly if the Americans were a principal source of some of the intelligence information the Canadians have. They might be telling them behind the scenes that they can't release it or that they can't make it public for various technical and other reasons. We just don't know. But the Canadians have to come forth and let us see what this is that is behind their charges.
In terms of the way going forward, Mr. Jaishankar, what would you believe would be the next steps on this? I mean, how long? Some people hope that this will get blown over a period of time. Others tend to point out that perhaps there has to be a political change in Canada on the one side. Others believe that as we go along, it's the investigations and what kind of evidence is brought about that could determine how this plays out. What would you believe are the key markers as we look forward to how this relationship and how this, row will play out?
The way I would look at it is that Canada's friends have to advise Canada on what is the right way forward. These statements by Secretary of State Antony Blinken and Jake Sullivan, they were made soon after Justin Trudeau had made this, point of credible allegations. At that time, they might have thought that there is some, reasonable evidence that might surface. But now it is about 10 days and we have heard nothing at all whatsoever from the time when the first allegation was made. And I think the conversation that is taking place today, I am reasonably hopeful. Dr. Jaishankar has met the National Security Advisor. He is meeting Secretary of State. I'm sure there are going to be discussions on this. And I'm sure India's position has been laid out very clearly and very forcefully, and that is going to be done again on a one-to-one basis with all these senior officials. And I'm sure they will see merit that, there is, Canada has overstepped. The step that it has taken is politically very immature and irresponsible. So I think slowly and gradually try to advise them. On the second part, what you said, that a change of government in Canada, I think that is their business. And even if someone else comes and if their dependence upon the NDP or the Khalistani sympathizer, Jagmeet Singh Dhaliwal, if that continues, then I don't see very many changes taking place in as far as the policies by Canada are concerned. The last point, if you permit me, what gentleman made this, that, the story was going to break and that is why Justin Trudeau came out. I think that is not how statesmen are expected to behave. These are, media will continue to write and say what they have to say. And I think here it is like in any democracy, you have to allow the law enforcement authorities to carry out the investigation, complete the investigation, and not let it get tainted by political views that, that the Prime Minister comes out and, he wants to steal a march over the media. I think that's a very irresponsible way of going about it. And that has really hit him in the face the way he's done it, because obviously he's done it without adequate preparation or adequate evidence at all. So coming to your question again, what is the way forward? I think basically the friends, mutual friends of both India and Canada, they should advise Canada that they need to tamp it down, because obviously it seems to be that Canada has done it, the Canadian Prime Minister has done it under pressure from its partner in government, that is the National Democratic Party, that you need to apply pressure on India. And that is why this case of Hardeep Singh Nijjar, who is a declared terrorist in India, against whom a red corner Interpol notice has been issued, there is so much of focus on his death, his killing, while there are so many other organized crime deaths that are taking place in Canada, but nothing is really done about that or spoken about.
Dr. Walter, what would be the key markers that you would look out for as this confrontation, if I may call it that, evolves?
Well, first would be any surfacing of evidence that the Canadians have, right? It is, as we said, it is past time for them to sort of make their case. I would also look then for messaging from the United States, right? I think the U.S. has the greatest interest in trying to see this matter resolved or wound down in a way that does not jeopardize either partnership with India or its relationship with its, NATO ally,
right.
Canada. And then again, Dr. Jaishankar has been absolutely clear that this is not Indian government policy. So I would look for any sort of change in language around that might suggest that maybe there was a local actor who overstepped or something like that. But failing all of those things, I would really look for messaging from the Americans, perhaps slightly stepping away from the Canadians or trying to take the tone down a bit.
Important points there. Toby Simon, I believe we can go across now to Toby Simon as well as Namrita. We had some connectivity issues there. Toby, what would you believe is the roadmap ahead, both in terms of short term as well as in terms of long term, in the relationship not just between India and Canada, Toby? I'm talking of India's equations with the US, UK, or perhaps even Australia and New Zealand.
Thanks, Veera. I think the short and the immediate priority should be to play and see that the situation comes under control. I would just spin it a little back to say that let us assume that Americans were the ones who gave the feed, and that could be a lot of sensitivity in sharing that, because America doesn't, there is a partnership going on between India and the US. So I would, in the larger interest that knowing that Canada and India and the US and the one that they are building, the US is building with India, is for the near and future. It's always proverbial when you say that bird in the hand is worth the 10 in the bush. So perhaps we need to think about a situation that definitely there is something in the air. And I, for one, wouldn't want to dismiss it. Handle it very diplomatically, handle it with a little bit of a glove, soft glove, so that we are also not, in any difficulty later. And I think these are things that will have repercussions over the next 20 years, 10 years. And it is always better to see that, we are seen as the Vishwaguru, with a higher moral standing.
Okay.
Given the fact that there are difficulties.
Given the fact that there are difficulties. Namrita, what are you picking up?
I think the messaging, very interestingly, is so starkly different between what the Western world here, the US-Canada media is portraying, and the Indian media is stating. And I want to make it clear that in India, there's unanimous consensus on the fact that this is a fringe movement. 99.9% of the Sikhs, if not more, do not support this. And there are obviously the political compulsions of the Canadian Prime Minister and his electoral prospects at play. Over here, though, the larger media, whether it be liberal or conservative, is talking about the increasing prowess and the influence of India's agencies, such as the Research and Analysis Wing, particularly RAW, and the fact that it has the ability to orchestrate a possible assassination of a terrorist. Now, this is a very interesting perspective coming in from both the countries. So obviously, if there is indeed proper evidence shared and that gets undoubtedly played out in the short term, the larger term, and I've said this time and again, is the fact that there is a bigger fish to fry in the room for both India and China, and that's for both India and US, and that's China. And interestingly, in the Republican presidential debate last night here in the US, there was no mention of this diplomatic standoff. In fact, repeated mentions of the Chinese problem for America and the strategy for the Indo-Pacific region. So I just want to underline that. And finally, there is Nassim Taleb, who speaks about the increasing influence of the intolerant minority. This is the flexing of the muscle of a small fringe group, which is needed in a Western democracy in Canada. And I think the messaging which India has come out with is the fact that the Deauville Doctrine, which moved to the defensive offensive after what we witnessed in Mumbai 26/11, that defensive offensive shows that India, whether diplomatically or otherwise, is out there very strongly, unequivocally, to protect its Indian citizens from any threat, whether emanating within the country or outside.
The same standards for the whole world. I guess if one can take that standards, the other should be able to take it. That would be India's point. But my final question, we're completely running out of time, to Mr. Sibal. Is there a lesson in our history or an event that happened or an incident of this nature in our history that we can take as potentially a lesson for how to deal with the situation right now? Very quickly.
Look, we've suffered from Pakistan promoted terrorism for how many years? Since the middle 1980s. The perpetrators of 26/11 and all the other attacks that we have suffered from are next door in Pakistan. Have we taken out anyone? I mean, if we had that policy, we could have taken out, and with much more justification. Now, for us, for anybody to imagine that we'll go and murder someone thousands of miles away who's really not very important in the larger scheme of things. He's an irritant, but he's not a grave danger to India's security, as the Pakistani-inspired terrorism in Kashmir and elsewhere is actually simply not a sensible way to look at India. That is one. The other is that Trudeau has done immense disservice to India's relations with the West in general by creating the impression that India now is potentially in the league of Iran and North Korea and Russia in taking out dissidents abroad through violent action. This is a huge damage he's done to India, which will not go away. And secondly, now that Trudeau has put his own political future, it's in play, because he has now to move forward and prove that this has happened. Otherwise, it'll be a huge political setback to him. Already he's in trouble over this Nazi collaborator whom they honored in the parliament. And if there's a second blow, that he's not able to actually substantiate his allegations made formally on the floor of the parliament, this will finish him politically. And the United States, having taken the position it has, cannot also draw back and say, no, things are all right, the matter has been sorted out and we will now move to another subject. They also can't do it because they also have now asked India to cooperate and will keep pressing on this point on India. And this will create a bit of a problem in our ties. Right. So I don't know how this thing is going to end. It's not going to end so easily.
Well, on that note, we'll keep a close track of how it evolves. But thank you all for joining us and sharing your thoughts. As I mentioned, we'll keep a close track of how this diplomatic row evolves. We'll take a very short break, but when we come back, is India ready for a new age reality? That's the question we're asking. Don't go away.